I'm just looking through the notes from our last meeting. We had, basically wanted to be ready to kind of go through the entire closeout process. Was kind of where we left off last time. And let's see. Yeah, that was kind of what we wanted to be ready for this time. I'm trying to remember exactly what the assignment was. And then I had an assignment to reach out to Ian and find out what he was doing in order to get Ecms into the, or like an itemized list of stuff into an Ecm. So I was able to do that. So I'll run through that with you guys and then, you know, share a couple of things that I learned from him. And then really just want to find out where you guys are at on it and what you guys need as far as the next steps so that we can, so that everybody feels like they're pretty confident with this and ready to kind of start doing it on, you know, jobs that are in production. So before I get started, what questions or did anybody learn anything or find anything out that they thought would help the group, or anybody have any questions that they're hoping that we can answer? I'll take that as a no. I just want to look and see what some of our questions were. So how to deal with the NAM furnace. If a furnace pays back, how do we get it to use list of user-defined measures? So that is really what I'm going to show you in a minute. If you have a receipt from Home Depot or for materials used on the job, how do you get that cost to the work order? And then do we need to include ancillary items such as screws, zip ties, etc.? Okay. So I learned a couple of simple things, and I'm wondering if we want to walk through them all. The first thing we want to do is, so if you guys will go to your, so open up the Neat Audit and click on the Preferences tab and click on the Features tab. And down on number 12, you want to uncheck number 12. And then probably hit restart. And then let me know when you've done that, and then we'll talk about what that is.
Done. Done.
All right, so as it says to show the in-stock column when copying items from a supply library. And it just says this gets slow for large databases. So I don't know if you guys will run into an issue with it or not. It was Ian just recommended we shut it off because we don't need it. Unless you are tracking, I think if you are tracking or using the Neat Audit to actually track your inventory, then you may want to turn that back on. So, so yeah, if you intend to track your inventory, try turning it on and see what it does. And when I show you this next step, if you find that step is running really, really slow, then you want to come back in and shut it off. And I made or was in the middle of making a note about that on our right here. So anyway, when you're copying your itemized measures, if it's running slow, you'll want to go to the Preferences tab and Features and turn that thing off. Number 12. Okay. So the question is, if I go to a work order and let me find a measure. Now let me just delete this one and we'll start fresh. I think we'll start fresh. Okay, so we ran our audit and the audit is showing, it created work orders for us, and hopefully each of you have, I think we created a work order for like an electrician, a HVAC technician, and then just a regular work order, which would kind of cover everything else. So I'm looking at the work order for everything else, which for mine, I have 12 measures, which are, I have infiltration reduction, tank insulation, some lighting, pipe insulation, shower heads, duct insulation, and on down the list. And the question is, so we did a measure for an itemized cost for the attic scuttle, and that gave us this list of things, and then when we, after the job was done, we could come in here and hit the copy button, and then we could actually tell it how many of each quantity we used. And that works great for itemized measures, but the question is, how do we do that for these energy conservation measures? Because when we run it, we just have materials and labor typically. And so the way to do that is, let me actually delete this one really quickly. So if you'll go into your, do each of you have a measure to insulate your water heater blanket? Or yeah, to insulate your water heater on the you guys ran? If you don't, will you go into the audit? So let's get into the client completion report audit that you've been working on, and on your base loads, show that your water heater has no insulation. And then rerun your audit. And once you rerun your audit, if it did not have the tank insulation, then you'll also want to click on create work order, and you'll want to replace the previously generated work orders with new ones. So if you, let me know when you're ready. If you already had that on there, just let me know you're ready, or if you're going through that process, let me know when you're done.
I already have it.
All right.
Yeah, we're good.
Okay.
Yeah, we're good.
Okay. How's Southeast? You guys ready, or are you working on it?
I'm good.
Okay. And then how about, I wasn't sure if 6 County mentioned anything yet. You guys working on it, or are you ready? And you're muted on my screen, so you might have to unmute yourselves if you're trying to talk to me. And then same thing for Housing Authority. Were you guys ready?
Yeah, we're ready.
Okay. I still haven't heard from Seth yet on my end, so but let's go ahead and move forward. Okay, so now if you on your work order, everybody should have. I'm gonna hit cancel on mine. Everybody should have a work order that is going to have a tank insulation measure on there. And then, so I'm going to close that for a second. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that we have all of the materials that we would need to insulate a water heater put into our supply library. If you have already put in all of your materials in your supply library, then you may not need to do this. If you're like me, I have a supply library where all I have in here so far are all the materials we needed for an attic scuttle. And then I just added a few materials that I assume you would need for a water heater blanket, but I really don't know. So what materials do we need? I'm assuming we need the blanket itself and then some sort of tape and maybe some zip ties. Is that correct? Or what materials do you guys use to install a water heater blanket?
Yeah, tape and some ties. And let's see.
Is there anything else that you typically use?
No. You could possibly use like one of those earthquake straps if you wanted to, but
Okay. So I put in here, I've added just my, well, there's the tape. And I have no idea what the cost is on that. So if anybody has a real cost, let me know. But I just put in some tape and I called it water heater blanket tape, and I put it, the unit is per roll, and then I just put the cost of a roll at $7.50. So make sure that you guys have whatever that tape is called in your construction materials hardware in your library, your supply library. And then I also put in the actual blanket. I just put it in as water heater insulation blanket, and I wrote R11, and I put each, and I have no idea what the cost is. I put mine in at $14.85. So if you know what the cost is, or you already have it, leave yours as what the actual cost is. If you don't know, then go ahead and make up a number for right now. And then the other item I put in zip ties. And how long do those zip ties, what's the length on those things? Or do you put a couple of them together?
we use actual water heater blanket straps that have like a little buckle.
Oh, okay. I'm going to change this to that then. So I'm going to put water heater blanket strap. And any idea on or a guesstimate on a cost on those?
I think they only cost like $1.50 or something. Yeah, I got mine in at 90 cents. Yeah,
Do those, is that per strap, or do they come in a package of 2 or something?
It's per strap for us.
Okay, so water heater blanket strap, and I'm just putting them in at 90 cents each. Okay, so let me know once you've got those 3 things in there. So insulation, some tape, and a water heater strap.
We're good. Yeah.
Good.
Okay. All right, so now once you have all those things in your supply library, we're going to go back into our setup library and we're going to create a user-defined measure. And we're going to create it for your water heater insulation. I'm not really sure what you'd want to call this right now, but just for starters, I just called mine an ECM, and then you know, the what's the D in the DWH stand for?
Domestic.
Domestic. Thank you. Domestic water heater tank insulation materials. And again, I'm not sure if that's a great naming convention or not, but for the sake of this demonstration, that's what I put down for today. And then, so I'm just putting this in as just materials. So I'm not selecting energy savings or anything like that. And I actually won't ever use this measure as a measure, but we'll use it to copy and paste from. So anyway, if you'll make a measure, name it something, you know, water heater tank insulation materials, and then put down, you know, construction materials and select those 3 items. Just changing mine to the strap. And so I have 1 blanket, or sorry, 1 roll of tape, 1 blanket, and 2 straps. How many straps do you put on them? 2 or 3?
The new field guide says we need 3.
3?
Yeah, that's what the new field guide says.
Okay. So basically put all those materials in there. And now you have a user-defined measure with all those materials. So let me know when you guys have done that.
Got it.
Yeah, we're done.
All right.
Hey, Matt. So I kind of missed what you guys were talking about. So why are we doing one for water heater blankets?
So we have a question. Well, there was this right here. So I was supposed to reach out to Ian and figure out if there's a way to create the itemized list for ECMs. So in one of the last meetings we had, we created it like an itemized list for all the materials you would need to build an attic scuttle. Well, the attic scuttle was an NAM. And so when we created that, we created a user-defined measure, or either an NAM or maybe we did it as an HSM. I don't remember. Did we do it as a HSM? Anyway, I think we created one of these for, or did we do it for an ASHRAE fan? Maybe that's what we did it for. Yeah, we created one for ASHRAE fan. And so anytime you select the ASHRAE fan as a health and safety measure, then it puts all of these materials on your work order so that you guys know, you know, you can look down this list of materials and say, well, for this ASHRAE fan, do I need this? Yes or no? Do I need this? Yes or no? So you can pull all the materials you need and send them out on the job. And then also when you're done, the guys in the field can kind of use this as a checklist. They can use the work order and say, okay, you know, how much of the Henry's caulking did I use? How much of the insulated flex duct did I use? And they can make notes in the field. And then when you close it out, you can actually adjust the amount of materials used so that we can, because the whole goal is to figure out the real cost. This is all still estimated cost of doing the measure. We have to figure out what the real cost is. So we did that for a bath fan because that was like in our audit, it was a user-defined measure. It wasn't an ECM. It ended up being an HSM. Well, on the audit under a work order, if the measure was an ECM, then the only thing that shows up is your estimated cost for materials and labor, and that's it. It doesn't give us that itemized list of materials. So in order to get an itemized list of materials, you actually have to go through and create that list for each one of the measures. In fact, I don't know if this will help or not. I went through our guidelines and started creating a list of like measures or things that we do. And this is what I've come up with so far. I'm sure there's a bunch more things to add to this list. And I don't, the ESCMs, HSMs, IRMs, these columns are not really the best way to categorize these, because there's some of these things could be an ECM or an HSM, or in some cases would end up being installed as an NAM. But anyway, the whole idea is that like it's easy to get these measures onto the work order with a list of itemized materials. But these measures that the audit will just automatically call for, all of them except for this one, these ones are always just going to show up with materials and labor. So in order to make an itemized list of all the materials we need, we have to do this extra step, which is kind of what we're walking through right now. Does that make sense?
Because I know there's like a checkbox for tank insulation, so I was just wondering why we're creating another measure. So, but yeah, it makes sense.
Okay. And hopefully if it's not perfectly clear, it will become a little clearer as we go. So, okay, so everybody's got an itemized measure. Now, what we're trying to do is, so go to your work order for so we're looking for the client, the work order for just the field stuff, which would include the measure. Oops, I want that. It's going to include all your ECMs, and it's going to include the one for the tank insulation. So find the work order that your tank insulation is on. And just let me know that you've got that. Or if I've missed a step, tell me to back up a bit.
We're there.
Okay.
And when you get there, actually select your tank insulation measure. Now, just to show you, let's see if I can do this. You guys don't need to do this unless you want to, but I've just switched over to the work order for the electric on this client, and I'm assuming it has, the one measure that it has is that ASHRAE fan. And you can see here that on this work order, it actually has the list of all the materials that were needed for the ASHRAE fan. And if I go to actually preview the work order, then it's going to show, like, here's the ASHRAE fan and here's a list of all the stuff that, you know, you would need. When you send this out in the field, all of these fields here are blank. And the way that Ian has been using this is his guys would actually, once they've installed the measure, they'll go through and with a pencil just write in the quantities that they used in this column. They'll write any field notes down, and then that goes back to their office. So this measure shows everything. Now if I close that, and I'm going to switch back over to my work order just for not the electrician, but just the field crew. If I preview this work order and I go to find my tank insulation, it doesn't tell me all the materials that I need. It only says tank insulation and labor. And so what we want to get it to do is to have that itemized list so that when it goes out into the field guys can say, oh, we used this many blankets and this many straps and so on. So in order to get it to do that, you got to go to the work order, you got to go to the measure and select the tank insulation measure. Actually, I guess you don't have to do all that yet. But you want to make sure you're on the work order for that. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add a new measure to this. So right now there's 11 measures. We're going to add a new measure, and we're going to go to our user-defined measure. So it just says copy from user-defined measures. And we're going to select that new measure that was the tank insulation that we just created. And it's going to come up and show us the list of materials we need. So let me know when you've been able to create the new measure and select the tank insulation materials.
Got it.
That working for everybody else? I only heard one person say they got it. Or are you still working on it?
Still working on it. Mine's not popping up for some reason.
Yeah, mine's not either.
Okay. So it's just not showing up in when you select this copy from user-defined measures. It's not showing up in that list.
Yeah, it's not pulling up on that list.
Okay, you may be pointed at the wrong library. So so in our supply library, so you were able to create the materials in the supply library on the construction materials tab. Is that right? And then in the setup library, you were able to create a user-defined measure with those 3 materials on it. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay, so I guess the thing we want to check is the name of our library for our setup library needs to be, I don't know if it's going to show it here, yeah. So on the work order information on that tab, now it doesn't have the setup library there. Make sure that one is pointed at least to the right supply library. And then
Okay, it is.
the other thing we want to check is, so for this client, under the neat audit, you'll want to make sure that the neat audit is pointed at the right. So here's the setup library, the supply library. So the neat audit needs to be pointed at the right setup library. So is this setup library here the same one that is listed here with that new list of stuff? So
Yeah, it says it is.
that, and then it's not showing up in your user-defined measures. If your user-defined measure screen is still open to the measure we created, maybe try clicking. So it says I have 19 user-defined measures. I'm going to switch from this one. I'm just going to scroll to the next one. There were no supply items of this type to copy. Okay. So I just scrolled away from it and then I went back to it. Sometimes if this thing is still open, it hasn't actually created the measure because it thinks you're not done yet. So maybe try scrolling past that measure to a different measure and then go back into your work order on your measures tab and see if it shows up in the list now.
Sometimes if you just switch tabs, it works too. If you just go to like your door tab and then back to your other tab, then it'll take it.
Sorry, I missed something. Somebody stepped in and was talking to me. How'd you get those green boxes for the copy from user-defined measures into your work order?
How do I get these green boxes to show up?
Yeah.
So we were in the work order. I had 11 measures that the audit generated. And then I clicked on the new to create a new one.
Oh, gotcha.
So now that it's created measure number 12, now it's saying, okay, what kind of measure is this going to be? And so,
right, I see it now.
This option, and then so now I've got that drop down, and hopefully your tank insulation is showing up there. So if it does, then select that, and it should bring up all three.
Yep, we're good.
You guys are good. Who else is struggling?
Mine's still not popping up. I'll mess around with it and see if I can figure it out.
Okay.
Yeah, same with mine. I've got, it's having trouble finding that supply library.
Okay. But you've got the green boxes that are showing up here. It's just nothing showing up here.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah, it's the only other thing I can think is if you need to shut everything down and open it back up. And in fact, we can take a minute to do that. If you'll just shut all your screens down and exit the Weatherization Assistant. And then start it back up. And when you start it back up, just click on the Work Orders tab. Make sure you're on the work order that is going to have that the tank insulation measure on there. And then now I had created this new item here, number 12. So if you created one, you may have an extra blank measure there that you might need to delete now. But if you need to, try creating a new measure and then see if it shows up in your drop-down now. Let me know if that worked for either of you.
No, it's still not working.
Okay.
Yeah, for mine either.
Okay. All right. Well, let's move past it for now, and if you guys aren't able to figure it out, then I can hopefully help you out after this meeting or something. But okay, so I have got my new measure. Oh, I just deleted my new measure. I'm going to create my new measure. I'm going to copy it from this. So I now have these three measures showing, or these three materials showing up. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to copy and paste. So we're going to select these, all of these measures, and we're going to copy them into the original measure, the tank insulation measure. So I selected this only so that I can get my list to show up. And then if you'll, up in the left-hand corner, if you click on that box, the empty box at the top, it will highlight all four of these rows. And then while all four of those rows are highlighted or black, then you're going to hit Control-C to copy it. And then you're going to switch to the tank insulation measure. So again, on the tank insulation measure, we just simply have materials and labor. And then you're going to go down and click on the box where it has the asterisk. And you're going to hit Control-V to paste it. And then it says, are you sure you want to paste these records? I hit yes. And now it has dropped into that ECM measure those three materials that we're going to need for that measure. Did that work for anybody who was able to try it?
Yeah, worked for us.
Worked for me.
Okay. Ian told me that some of the people in his office, the first time that they did that, it kind of freaked out and they had to shut the neat audit down, but then when they open it back up, it worked just fine. So, and then what you can do is you can actually go in to like highlight these top two rows and just hit delete. So your materials. Yes, thank you.
You want to leave your labor on there, right?
You are correct. So just delete the top row. So select that, and then I think if you just hit delete, then it will get rid of that. So I still have my labor, and then I have the materials that we need listed. And now, if we go back to just the work order tab, so I was on the measures tab, I'm going to go back to the work orders tab, and I just want to preview that work order. Now it should have my tank insulation. No, this is not the right one. This was the extra one I added.
Mine took the labor off anyway, even though I didn't highlight it.
So make sure you're on. So this is the one, the ECM tank insulation materials that I created, which I'm going to go in and delete. But this one over here, measure number 2, was the actual measure, the tank insulation, and it lists out the 3 different materials plus my labor. So I'm going to close this. I'm going to go back to my measures, and I'm going to go to the materials measure that I made just so I could copy that list, and I'm going to delete it. So now I'm back down to my 11 measures, one of which was the tank insulation. And now if I go to my work order and preview it, it shouldn't have that extra one that I made. Just copy stuff. And now I just have a measure for tank insulation with an itemized list of materials that I need. Did that work for anybody else?
Yeah, I got it to work.
Okay. So that's what Ian has been doing to actually get an itemized list of materials for every one of his ECMs, which seems like a lot of work.
Is this something that's going to be a little more built in, I guess, when they do their online version?
I do not know. That same question occurred to me this morning as I was preparing for this, and I just, given the little bit of information that they've given us about what's going to come out on the online version, I have no idea, but it just occurred to me this morning I could probably at least reach out and make a suggestion about it. It kind of depends on how many other people are using these features as far as how they would prioritize that. But I will definitely let them know that this is something that would really help if you could itemize this stuff and skip the convoluted process to make it work.
I think if they even offer a work order, it ought to be something available. I mean,
yeah,
the only way to make them accurate.
Exactly. So.
Do you know when they're releasing this?
The new one is, it's supposed to be out. I think the last time that they told us a timeline was like sometime in the next 18 months, and that was 3 or 4 months ago. So as I've been watching that and thinking about, going through and teaching everybody this on this current version, a part of me thought, well, let's just wait till the new stuff comes out. But the problem is that I've been around long enough to know that that kind of a timeline can move multiple times. So we could, if we waited, we could be waiting 3 or 4 years before we actually have the new version. Hopefully they'll surprise us and actually get it out in the next 18 months. But it's more important for us to actually get this right now instead of waiting until they come out with something new that may or may not be any easier. So we decided to go ahead and start taking the MMBTUs off of this and start using the tool we have now. And hopefully when the new one comes out, the learning curve won't be as great. But so in my mind, the next step would be for each of us to actually go through and make a whole, get an entire work order to do this. To basically go through and make sure that every one of the measures that came up on the work order has an itemized list of materials that could be needed on the job. Which would mean that each of you would need to go back and actually create a user-defined measure for everything that's on that work order. Or if it would help, you almost need to create a user-defined measure for everything in this list, or at least for all of the materials in this list, and then that way, once you had that, then you could go into this audit that we're currently working on and go through each one of your measures and make sure that, you have an itemized list for each one of them. Ian did mention some of these things, like, of course I don't have it on here, like a low flow shower head. Low flow shower head, it might not be necessary to create an itemized list for that, because it's basically a low flow shower head and some labor, right? There's usually no more materials than that. If you wanted Teflon tape on that list, maybe you'd put it there. Maybe the Teflon tape would be a good, a good reason to go in and use. I think you have, when you create that measure in the setup library, let me see if this works.
Hey Matt, you can actually just select certain items you want. You don't have to like copy and paste it all. Like you can just like go to your measure on your work order,
Yes.
and then go to your type, and then construction materials, and then your cost supply, and it'll show you all your materials you have on your library.
Correct.
So you don't have to go through that.
Yeah, so the whole idea with this, oh, and maybe this would also be an easier thing to do. The whole idea with this is that Ian has gone through and he's created like, what's a list of all the materials that I could possibly need? So that basically I kind of have a checklist. Because on the, let me find the ASHRAE fan. The ASHRAE fan, I'm not going to need to use every one of these materials every single time, right? But the whole idea behind it was he wanted to create a list of materials so that when the guy was putting together a box full of materials to send out on the job, he would put everything in the box. And then that way the guys would get out there and they would be certain they had everything they needed. And then if they didn't use it, it would just come back in the box. But basically the whole idea is like, make a list so that when you're sitting here thinking, well, what do I need on this job? You've got this list that you can look at. So yes, you could go through and say, well, as an auditor, I know I'm not going to need the electric switch and plate because that's already there. So I wouldn't add that, but I'm going to add all these other items to the list. So kind of the same idea for every other measure. And yeah, if it's easier just to go in here and quickly add one material instead of copying and pasting everything, then you could do that. I do want to test one thing really quickly. Let me just delete that. So we added a measure here and then copied and pasted from that measure. I want to know if I can just copy and paste from this list. So like instead of adding a bunch of new measures, if I would have just gone to my tank insulation, and then if I would have just gone in my user-defined measures in my setup library and found my list of tank insulation materials and just selected them and hit Control-C and then went over here and hit Control-V. Apparently that did not work. I wonder if this was the error he was talking about. Let me shut this down and see if I can do it again and make it work. So tank insulation, got my 3 materials and labor, and then from my setup library, I'm going to grab my list of tank insulation materials and hit Control-C and hit Control-V. value you entered isn't valid for this field. Okay. Anyway, so maybe it's not possible to have this, you know, just your list of stuff open. I wonder if it'll let me just go like this, Control C, Control V. No. Well, let me do one at a time.
Looks like they have more boxes on the work order than
Yeah,
the setup library.
that's what I'm wondering about, is that I'm trying to paste something that has fewer columns. Yeah. So you'd actually have to create the measure over here so that you get the same amount of columns working, which is kind of crazy, but anyway. But yeah, so that's that's what he's been doing to actually get all the materials onto a work order so that they can go through and check them all off. Now, you wouldn't necessarily have to do that. It kind of depends on how your agency's going to run or once, you know, has been running or whatever works for you. Like, as far as the audit goes and as far as what you put on your work order to get the job done, you could send the work order out with just, you know, materials and labor listed, and that's it. That's up to you. But at the end of the job, you need to come in and itemize what materials actually went on the job. So if you've got a better way to do that, you know, if you just want your guys out in the field to write down all the materials they used, by all means they can do that. But I kind of like this approach because if you give them that full list, then the guys in the field, you know, on the work order, they can go back through and go, oh, you know, I use these materials, yes or no? And it's less likely that they will forget to say, you know, oh yes, we did use 3 straps, or oh wait a second, we actually used 4. But you know, find what works best for you guys.
Hey Matt.
Yeah.
I just tried, I copied and pasted it to an Excel form, and then I was able to copy and paste it from that Excel form to the work order.
Oh, okay.
So you can like make a sheet for Excel and then just have all your measures on there and then just copy it from there.
That's a good idea. That way you're not creating a bunch of new ones that you have to go in and
Yeah,
delete.
go back and delete them all.
I like that. Yeah. So you just copy and pasted.
Yeah, I just copy and pasted all of that and then just pasted it to an Excel form.
Like that?
Yeah, and then
then
it just,
Did
from there I was able to copy and paste it.
Did you grab like these 3 rows, or did you grab like this?
I grabbed that right there, yeah.
So if I hit Control C here, and then go into that measure, and then did you just select right there and hit paste?
Yeah, and I just pasted it to that right there.
Oh, let me try this again.
Oh wait, you copied the wrong one. You need the one from the work order.
Oh.
So you got to create the measure still on the work order.
But
after you create, you can just delete it, and then you'll have it on the Excel form.
I gotcha. So you could go through and create.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, you can create it one time, and then you just have to do it one time, and then it'll be on there.
delete this thing. Okay, so you created a new thing on a work order
Yeah.
like this. Then you selected everything and hit copy. And then you copied it to an Excel spreadsheet so it actually had all the right columns.
Yeah, so I had all the right fields, yeah.
And then you grabbed this like that
Yep.
and hit Control C here. And then you went into the actual measure and then on the asterisk field and then hit Control V. And it added all the stuff. Cool.
Yep.
I like that. Okay. How's everybody doing with this? Everybody following this? Anybody got questions or they're just not quite connecting the dots on some of this that we want to talk about?
Pretty simple.
Yeah.
I think I got it.
Okay. All right. Well, let's. So is that the next logical step? Is to actually go through and make sure you have like an itemized list for all of your ECMs, and then basically be able to go through and do this for a whole work order or a whole audit.
Yeah, that works.
Or is there some other step that you guys feel is next? So if I made the assignment from today's meeting for each of you to go through and create a user-defined measure for all allowable ECMs, and I can send you, you know what, I'll just share this list with you guys real quick. So I'm sharing this as a Google Doc. If you guys as you guys are looking at this, if there are any other measures that aren't listed here that you're wondering about, just make another column over here and start writing them down, or use the comment stuff and like ask questions. Will that work? But the goal is
that'll work.
make sure you have a user-defined measure for at least for everything in this column here. Like ultimately, you're going to have a user-defined measure for everything, but let's at least just start with this. And I mean, wherever it's needed, like on the lighting retrofits, you may not need a user-defined measure because it's just going to be materials and labor every time, or a shower head, or a smart thermostat, some of those things. But you know, if you do, like if a smart thermostat, if you regularly need some wire to go with the installation, then create one. You know, so. But yeah, so if you guys will create a user-defined measure that includes all materials needed for your install for all of your allowable ECMs. And then go through and create a complete work order, or sorry, a complete job. So on this sample job we've been doing, if you guys will take all these, once you have the user-defined measures, go through and actually make your work orders for the entire audit. And then what I would like to do at that point is I'd like to have, if you guys feel like it would help, I'd like to have one more meeting where Ian joins us and you guys can ask him any questions that you have. Because I feel like once we've done this assignment number 3 where we create our own stuff and actually go through the process, I feel like we've kind of covered the whole thing, haven't we? Or is there any major part of it that we haven't answered?
So are we going to go through and add screws to it then? Are we adding screws and all the ancillary items to it?
Yeah, so let's talk about like a window install. For a window install, is that low E window? So we got a low E window. So you would create a measure, user-defined measure, and it would include the actual window. It would include your caulking. It would include any fasteners or screws that you regularly use to install them. If you have any additional vinyl pieces of trim that you regularly use, like you'd want to include all of those things on that user-defined measure. And then that way, your guys in the field can go through and go, okay, what did we use? Well, on this window, we used a little bit of caulk, we used a few screws, and that's it, right? But on the other job, we used some caulk, we used some screws, we used some additional like vinyl trim pieces, like anything else. So basically the whole idea is just make the list of materials as complete as possible for what you normally do so that your guys in the field have a checklist and they can just go down and go, well, how many of these materials did we use? Yes or no? So on that note, Ian did, so we talked about like a roll of tape and, you know, how do you cost that to a job? On this one, so I'm going to delete the stuff that I just added there. So on this one, I've got a water heater, I've got tape for a water heater blanket. I put 1 roll. I got blanket strap, 3 of them, and I got 1 blanket and then some labor. So when I'm actually going in and like costing this job out, I need to tell the audit what I actually did. So I can come in here and I can just copy everything over. But then I could actually change my quantities and I could say, well, on this one, I only used half a roll of tape. And I ended up using 4 straps instead of 3. And my labor was only 3/4 of an hour. So now for my for this measure, I have my estimated cost, which was $50. My actual cost was $40. My estimated SIR was a 0.4 or was a 41, and my actual ends up being a 50. So it had a higher payback than it did before. And that's this is the closeout process right here, is just coming in after the job is done, coming into each work order and putting in your actuals. And then what excuse me, what I've noticed Ian's agency has been doing is they've actually been reprinting their work orders. So I have all of that information in the file. And then also you've got the client completion report, which I don't think it shows this level of cost, but let me see what I got to do to get back to the client completion report. So if I go to the client and I look at the completion report for this file, I'm assuming it'll have run it with the new stuff. So where would so here's my work order for the electrical, for the HVAC, for this stuff. I'm just got to actually find the measure on this report now. Oh, there it is. So this shows, I guess we're missing the step where we would actually talk about which funding source and stuff.
It's over to the right under base loads. It lists shower heads, lights, pipe insulation, tank insulation.
Okay. So there's the total savings, total cost, and the actual SIR. So it adjusted my SIR up. It's also listing it here just under my actual materials and labor. So I can go through, this shows me a summary and says that this tank insulation actually cost $40.95. The funding source thing is the one thing we haven't really talked about, so maybe we need to address that in our next meeting as well. Just talk about how we would go through and cost this stuff out. Is there anything else we need to talk about to help complete this process?
Feel pretty comfortable with it.
Okay, so meeting 4, we need to discuss the funding source. So just discuss selecting the funding sources and completing the CCR. And then I don't think that'll take us too long. I assume a lot of you could fiddle around with that and kind of figure it out, but we can definitely cover it. But then I'll have Ian join us. To answer any other questions or give us any other pointers and stuff. So, so the assignment, how long you guys feel like you'll need for this assignment? So you're going to create user-defined measures for all of your allowable measures, and then you're also going to go through an entire audit. And actually build out all the work orders and, you know, for every measure. So complete, we'll call it itemized work order. You guys want to do that again in 2 weeks? You feel like you could knock that out sooner? Will it take longer? What do you guys feel that you need?
2 weeks sounds fair.
All right.
Should we just do it after the next tech meeting?
I don't want to do it for tech meeting. Is that what's coming up soon?
That's in 2 weeks, yeah.
Okay.
Could just do it after the tech meeting like we did before.
Yeah, would that work for everybody if we did that?
I'm not going to be here that week.
Oh, you're useless, man. What the heck?
I'll be doing something much better than this.
Oh, well, that's good. Are you going hunting or something?
Yeah, muzzleloader hunt.
Gotcha.
But I'm pretty good with most of that stuff you've been talking about, though.
Okay, well, and again, I'll record the next meeting as well. Let's plan on doing it this day, if that is okay, and we'll hopefully kind of wrap things up, answer any other questions you guys have. So, but really in between now and then, you will want to make sure that you take the time to work through the whole process and just write down any questions you have. I'm sure with Ian on the line, he'll be able to help us with any pointers and stuff as well. I'm sure there's dozens of things that, just like what Greg figured out today, things like that Ian may have found some shortcuts for as well. One of the things that he talked about, and I would love to get a little more detail from him on, it might make more sense to some of you guys, was on this whole issue of, how many screws and how many things go on each job. They have a lot of stuff that's inventory, and then they'll take a lot of stuff, like all the little ancillary items like fasteners and tapes and things like that, and they pull it out of their warehouse, and they actually they call it truck stock. So they'll pull it out of their warehouse inventory, and then they actually put it into the inventory of truck number 1. And then the way that they charge it to a job is just what I did on that last job, where I itemized that this, from the truck stock, the tape would have been included in the truck stock. That's just something they would have, put a few rolls on the truck. But then when I'm closing out the job, I'll say, okay, well, I used half a roll of tape on this job. So I know I still have that half a roll left on the truck. But it just allows them to where they're not having to pull off, 16 screws and 1.5 tubes of caulk for this one job. It's like you put a big bucket of screws on there and, a few cases of caulking, but then when you're done, you write down how many of each you used. So, but some of that stuff I think he may be able to give us a little more detail on that hopefully will help as well. So, anyway, so is everybody good with the assignment and the meeting time?
Yeah, that works.
Yep.
Okay. Well, I will send out a copy or a link to today's meeting and an invite for the next meeting, but it probably won't come out till this evening when I'm sitting in my hotel in Cedar City. So thank you guys for attending and participating, and if you think of other questions or other needs that this group might need, feel free to shoot me an email or give me a call. Otherwise, we'll all just get back together in a couple weeks. All right, have a good one.
Okay, thanks.